Hey guys, welcome to today's podcast. It's episode 318 of Stand Up Daily. Joining me today, journalist Judd Legum and the president of the anti-gun violence organization Brady United. It's Kris Brown, both on the Stand Up podcast for the first time. I'm Pete Dominick. I'm your host. Time to stand up with me right now. Stand up. Well, hello and welcome to your Thursday, folks. Thank you very much for checking in with me. It's always great to check in with you. Talked to a lot of people online yesterday in all different spaces, from the phone to the text to the polo to the emails. I'd love to hear from you. I am standupwithpete@gmail.com. And of course, if you're a subscriber, I'm really excited to see you tonight at our virtual hangout. We've got Professor Eric Siegel joining us, stopping by to talk about a very important decision that came down yesterday in the Ninth Circuit having to do with firearms. Also, trying to get a couple of other special guests to stop by. We will see, but either way, 8 p.m. tonight, it is the Stand Up with Pete Dominick virtual community hangout. I don't know. It doesn't really have a name, but every Thursday at 8 East, I go on Zoom, and you're invited if you're a subscriber. We always have a great time. We've built friendships, networks, and we'd love to hear from you. See ya. You don't have to have your camera on. You don't have to talk. You just lurk. You just be a boy or get to know people. Hopefully feel like you're not alone. That's certainly the main idea of it. Anyway, that's tonight. Always looking forward to you. Sign up to be a subscriber right now at patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. Oh, man, do I have a really fresh, hot-baked, juicy, deliciously enlightening new episode of Stand Up. Every day, of course, recapping the major news of the last 24 hours, usually welcoming two guests who are experts in their fields, or at least very interesting, entertaining, and intelligent cultural commentators, or thoughtful listeners that have something to say. Anyway, today, Judd Legum is joining me, and Judd is now writing 4 days a week the newsletter Popular.Info, which has had some really impactful investigations in its very young adventure on Substack. And Judd is a really smart guy. He was the founder of ThinkProgress, this organization, or this website, really, that liberals really dug into back in the early aughts. I was a huge fan of it. A lot of good stuff there. They did great work. Then he worked with, before that, he worked with John Podesta, as his research assistant. Then he went on after that to work on Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign, where, of course, she lost to then President Barack Obama. And after that, he went back to ThinkProgress, and eventually he started this newsletter in 2018. And it is so good and so important. And the work he's doing is such excellent work, exposing all kinds of corporate and government corruption. And Judd is awesome. I had an awesome conversation with Judd. So psyched to have him on the podcast for the first time. He's got a major following, so that's a good get for us. And then also, I've got Kris Brown, who was really great to talk to. She's the president of Brady United, which is an anti-gun violence nonprofit. And we had a fascinating and really important conversation that I learned a lot from, as always. That is the idea here on Stand Up. It's to learn together every day about the issues that matter the most to you and to your family and to your neighborhood and to your spirit and your country and your planet, all of it. We talk about it here. We talk about it with each other. And we also share recipes and cleaning ideas. And I'm sorry, it's just such a great community. I don't know who that is. Is that Lindsey Graham meets Mr. Furley? Jack! Cindy! What's happening? Okay, let's get to it. It's time for yesterday's news, the last 24. No, I was thinking this really is, now I'm dropping the show pretty much as soon as I wrap it up. I used to wait and drop it in the morning and give it to subscribers first, but nobody really cared about that. It didn't seem that special, and more people are listening. And the folks who subscribe to this show and support me here in the shed and my family, they want it to grow. And so when I drop it as soon as I'm done, more people listen every day, and it really is the last 24. Literally, it's here's what I could find and put all together very late at night to get as close as I can to being relevant in this news segment. The conversations I have with people aren't necessarily always that way. They can be evergreen, which is why I like to give you as much as I can to choose from, whatever you like. But a lot of compliments on this opening segment. The Last 24, the news dump. People say they like it. Got a very nice compliment, by the way, from, well, several of you, but John Donvan, who is our good friend, ABC News correspondent, moderator of Intelligence Squared Debates, and co-author of In a Different Key, the most important book written about autism, which is now a documentary. And I'm really looking forward to talking with John about that. And he's a listener, and I'm so honored to have all of you listening. And thank you for your feedback. But last night, after I dropped my daughter off at modern jazz dance class, I headed over to local Chili's to get 2 beers and a couple of appetizers. I rarely go to a restaurant, much less an awful corporate chain, probably owned by an asshole. But I digress. I wanted the beers. It was local, but the bar was pretty empty, so I sat down feeling safe, read an email, came from John Donvan, who said, just wanted to say the opening in the news dump, so good. Overall, an amazing monologue. Then he told me he's on Mississippi to premiere his movie. So very excited to hear that, those kind words from John and the news of his film. But yeah, just gave me a lot of enthusiasm, so much support for this opening segment. I'm always tinkering around and seeing what I can do and make it better and make it more interesting and more informative and, of course, entertaining at any possible point. And now we are 6 minutes in and I'm still babbling. So how about we do it? Let's start with the headlines here on The Last 24. Brazil is looking like the worst place on earth for COVID-19 is a headline at NPR. North Korea fired projectile into the sea is a headline at Sky News. The Associated Press, U.S. Senate confirms transgender doctor for key post. A first. Rachel Levine nominated to be Assistant Secretary at the Department of Health and Human Services. Capitol fencing has been removed 77 days after a deadly riot, and I just did my old joke about newscasters reporting the news and telling potential terrorists exactly where we're most vulnerable. Yeah, the shift changes here at the nuclear power plant are said to take place between 7 and 8 p.m. That's when this nuclear power plant would be most vulnerable. Vulnerable? Well, I garbled my words there. Back to you for sports, Mike. Anyway, apparently the Capitol fencing has been removed. Here's proof that yesterday you had a better day than the captain of the ship who got stuck in Egypt's Suez Canal. Your day was better than that captain's day. That's where I want to start. A large container ship now has partially been, quote, refloated. I don't know what the hell that means, but it's still stuck in the Suez Canal. I'll go and check before I'm done with the news dump to see if it's out. Rob Bonta is going to be the first California Filipino attorney general. That's a big job, which is why I mention it. 35 million people. How many people? 30-some million people live in California. So whoever's the attorney general there, well, the last one, not the last one, but listen, Kamala Harris was attorney general of California. It's a big job. Now it's Rob Bonta's. Vice President Kamala Harris is going to lead the response to the migrant issue on the border. Got some sound for you on that. And I mentioned that court case that we're going to talk about tonight with Eric Siegel on the live hangout. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit has ruled that there's no right to carry, either openly or concealed in public. Well, I don't know exactly what that means. We all are going to be learning, though. All right, let's take a quick comedy break. I saw this because our friend, your friend, and mine, Kimmer at Kayvon Nyborg, Kim in Iowa, shared this from comedian sketch comic at Walter Masterson on Twitter, and it's a sketch. If people talked about coats the way they talk about vaccines.
Dude, it's like 30 degrees. Don't you want to put on a jacket?
No, I'm not brainwashed by the coat industry. Thank you.
The coat industry? Aren't you worried about getting hypothermia?
You know what? If you look at the statistics for hypothermia, most of those people were wearing coats.
And so that's reason to not layer up when it's literally been snowing all day.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I feel like if you did your own research, you'd sort of know this.
What?
But, you know, I mean, the coat industry is like $1 billion industry. All right, it's all a scam. All right, it's just they just want to get you to buy more coats. That's why they, you know.
But because coats work.
You're just okay, sheeple. I mean, it's sort of do your own research on this, and then we can have like an actual conversation about it.
But what if you get sick?
If I get, I mean, do I look sick?
Kinda.
All right, well, you need a little bit of a laugh to get you through this next clip because on today's episode of American Taliban, a United States senator, her name is Senator Hyde Smith. What's her first name? Cindy Hyde Smith said Wednesday, that she believed it's wrong to hold voting events on Sunday due to religious reasons. You know, how a lot of black folks go to church and then they all get on a bus and they go vote. It's called, even as a name, souls to the polls, as they've referred to it for years. Well, old Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith says it goes against the will of God.
When is the appropriate time that I can respond to some question?
You could respond right now, Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Senator Schumer's question was, he was wondering why on Sundays Georgia would not participate in an electoral process of gathering signatures of registration and things on Sunday. And I would just like to respond to that. Georgia's a southern state just like Mississippi. I cannot speak for Georgia, but I can speak for Mississippi on why we would never do that on a Sunday or hold an election on a Sunday. You know, this is our currency. This is a dollar bill. This says the United States of America, in God we trust. Etched in stone in the U.S. Senate chamber is in God we trust. When you swore in all of these witnesses, the last thing you said to them in your instructions was, so help you God. In God's word in Exodus 20:18, it says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. So that is my response to Senator Schumer. That was
madness. That was madness. And I just tweeted, I really did, Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is the chairman of that hearing today, and asked her, please ask Senator Hyde-Smith, or whatever her name is here, please ask her how she feels about Sunday football. Is NFL football on Sunday, which is basically a ritual and as close to an American ritual as we've got, and to some a religious event and a tradition, of course. Is that okay? Is it okay to play football? Is it okay to go to the arena, the stadiums, and sell beer and work there as a parking attendant or a ticket taker? Is it okay to be the players and the coaches? Is that all right to do on the Sabbath? You archaic fossil? Sorry. Okay. Moving on. I mean, this hearing and what we're seeing with these voting laws be built to solve a problem that doesn't exist. It's absolutely horrific. And it's the most important issue, which is why I talk about it so much. But to put it succinctly, making it harder for black people to vote is racist. Voting for people who make it harder for black people to vote is a super racist thing to do. If you're supporting politicians who are passing these laws, writing these laws, then you're supporting the worst kind of racism. Really. I mean, it's obvious that any kind of violent attack, okay, is the worst kind of racism. Fair enough. Sorry, I'll walk it back a bit. But the systemic racism, obviously there's mass incarceration, but before anything else, it's suppressing the vote. The entire civil rights movement, not the entire thing, I digress again, but much of it was for voting rights. And that's what they got. The Voting Rights Act. Look into it. It was good. You've all heard me do this rant. Making it harder for black people to vote is racist. Voting for people who make it harder for black people to vote is a super racist thing to do. I can't believe that's something that needs to be said in 2021. Rant over. That rant was brought to you by 2-Day-Old Coffee. That's right, 2-Day-Old Coffee. It's actually not that bad. All right, and another Meghan McCain audio in our case, has gone viral because on The View in the last 24 hours, apparently most of the hosts in the conversation about Asian American representation mostly seem to agree that it was entirely appropriate for Democratic Senators Tammy Duckworth and Mazie Hirono to demand the Biden administration diversify its high-level staff. Sonny Hostin said she didn't see anything wrong with it. Sarah Haynes called it the right thing to do. But when it was Meghan McCain's turn to speak, she disagreed, as she often does. Meghan McCain cried identity politics over calls for Asian American host to replace her on The View, apparently. And you got to hear this and the outrage that it created as a result.
And so we're going to a place where even if people need money, even if people are qualified to get into Ivy Leagues, race and gender is more important than your skill qualifications, the content of your character. It is not what Martin Luther King Jr. preached. I think this is a very, very slippery slope. I was very surprised to hear someone like Tammy Duckworth say something like this. She got a lot of blowback from a lot of people, not just on the right. And I think this is actually just the natural progression of identity politics. And I will say, just to put a cap on this, The View is 25 years old next year. We've only had one Asian American co-host this show. So does that mean that one of us should be leaving at some point because there's not enough representation? We're talking about, is identity politics more important than qualifications of a job? And I think that's a question going forward that the progressive left is going to have to reconcile.
Okay, and before we go, because we're going to go and take a break, eventually we're going to come back and talk about...
Oh, Whoopi with the hard pivot. Let me just give you some quick reaction from women. I'm going to go women reaction only on Twitter. My friend Rain of April writes, relatively serious question, because a lot of people were making fun of her crazy hairstyles. Have we determined who Meghan McCain's hairstylist is for the show? Because I'd like to send them an edible arrangement or something. They wake up and choose violence every weekday. That wasn't today, but this is a choice, honey. That's what April wrote. Now, trans woman Charlotte Clymer is trying to get on The View, always by criticizing Meghan McCain. I love her. Hey, at The View, I promise that if you hire me to replace Meghan McCain, I'll never imply Lisa Ling, the most qualified host your show has ever had, is somehow on par with me because my father was famous. He's not, but also, Lisa Ling is way out of my league and Meghan's. Lindy Lee tweets, let me get this straight. All our lives, we've been teased and harassed for being too smart and qualified, but now Meghan McCain is saying Asian Americans don't have enough qualifications? And Susie Meister tweets, the opposite of imposter syndrome is called Meghan McCain. All right, one more. Sarah Reese-Jones. Meghan McCain says outrageously bigoted things, so she will trend due to outrage, thus further elevating a career based on saying ignorant and mean things and her husband's propaganda hackfest of hate. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I do not like her husband, Ben Domenech, who I've been mistaken for, not because we look alike, but because we have similar last names. I mean, he looks like an ugly tree. And, well, I don't. Okay. I like this clip. I thought it was pretty provocative. I like Phil Mudd. He's a real loose cannon. He's a former national security guy, government, and then non-governmental. And I know him. He's been on the show. I've tangled with him a couple times. I like him. But he's an analyst over at CNN, and he was on with John Berman, and they were analyzing a little bit about the suspect in the shooting in Boulder. And Phil Mudd just goes off, and I thought it was pretty good. Here it is.
We kept a close eye on him when he was in high school. He would say, someone is chasing me, someone is investigating me, and we're like, come on, man, there's nothing. He was just closing into himself. So if you hear that and you're investigating this, what do you think? What do you do?
Boy, I have two views. The first is, be careful. Do we want people who are friends or family calling federal authorities or state authorities and saying my friend or family shouldn't have a weapon? How are you supposed to investigate this at the state and local or the federal level? That's, there's 330 million people. I think people who say that are saying things that are appropriate, but there's a simpler answer. Look, this will offend you. I'm an American. I'm a proud American, but we live in the United States of arrogance. If you look at educational standards in this country, they are mediocre because we cannot look to Asia and Europe and say somebody has a better way. If you look at access to health care in this country, we are mediocre because we cannot look to Asia and Europe and say other people have better access. We should learn. If you look at violent crime and suicide by weapon, and you look at Asia and Europe, we simply look at America and say we're exceptional. We cannot look at other countries and say we can learn. This country has a problem with arrogance, John, and you're seeing it in spades when we're dealing with these violent crimes.
I just thought that was a great clip, but my question to Phil Mudd would be, and I should just ask him this, I know him this, aren't those countries basically socialist? They certainly have strong central governments that have a strong safety net. They have universal health insurance. They don't have mass incarceration. They don't have the gun crime. They have strong public schools, most of them. I mean, what are we talking about? I think we know what we're talking about. It's having government that actually works and that's actually funded and that is not demagogued all day long. It means having money out of politics and not having this horrifically corrupt campaign finance system. That's just a few things that Asia and Europe don't have. Phil Mudd. There you go. All right, let's do a comedy break, shall we? I just happened to see a couple comedy clips. I wish I could do this every day. If you're seeing funny things, send to me for comedy breaks. But my favorite comedian, well, the guy who inspired me the most as a young man was Dana Carvey, and he went viral after he was on with my old boss, Stephen Colbert, on CBS's Late Show, introducing to the world his Joe Biden impression, which is, amazing.
I do him at the town hall when he's like the gentle father to the country, and he looks like the alien who came off the spaceship in Close Encounters.
Yes.
Folks, come on, folks. Let's get real. I'm not kidding around here. you know, we got to do the thing. We did Barack. We did the deal, And, my dad, lost his job in Scranton. No joke. I'm not being a wise guy here. He said, Pops, why'd you lose? I said, Joe, I did. My mom said, that's the cookie, which he humble says, but do it. And here's the deal. Number one, the thing that they said. Come on. Number two, the two-part. Folks, three. Come on, I'm not kidding around. No rocket science. Here's the deal. Come on now. Now that he knew it floated. He told Bob Woodward. John Woodward. He told Bob Redford. Excuse me. I think, But folks, I care. I care a lot. People are suffering, and I do. And my mother said, that's the way the cookie is. And it goes those places. And, we can do this, shots. We can, in fact, and do better than we did before. So I do the sincere guy.
I love it.
Sincere, sweet.
That's so beautiful. That is so beautiful.
But there's a lot there if you just don't worry about the fact that he's 78. He gets a little confused sometimes. It doesn't mean you're attacking him personally or, but you have to acknowledge that, he's just, we're going to try. We're doing things, And then, and come on. Here's the deal. Let me I'm not kidding around. No joke, folks. My dad lost his job in Scranton. I lost my dog. I'm not kidding. I'm not being a wise guy. Don't. And he always does the list. Number one, the one part. Number two, what they said. Number three, you get the drill. Come on.
Oh, my God. Dana Carvey. Oh, so good. When I was in high school, we were obsessed with SNL, Saturday Night Live. My brother and I would always tape it and watch the next day because I couldn't stay up that late. I don't mean my parents didn't let me. I would fall asleep. I couldn't stay up past the monologue. It was hilarious. Everybody always used to make fun of me. But love Dana Carvey. And when I first performed on stage, my high school talent show, I emceed the talent show. Everybody else was like singing and dancing, I guess. I can't sing or dance, not that well. And so I was like, what can I do? So I decided to pitch hosting it. I said, can I host it as the MC and I'll do my impression of the president at the time, George H.W. Bush. And what I did was I did my impression of Dana Carvey's impression, Not gonna do it, everybody. Not gonna do it. Saddam Hussein, snake pit. My brother wrote the entire monologue for me, and it was hilarious and stands up. It holds up to today. I should get it and read it. Anyway, he did it the next year as Ross Perot as well. Dana Carvey was a huge inspiration. Dana Carvey was in the lobby at Sirius XM. So I walked right up to him like an annoying fan. And I told him that I worked there and I hosted a show and I was a stand-up comedian and he was the first big inspiration for me. And he was very nice, but he did not give me the reaction that I always hoped. He never could have. He could not have given me what I wanted. He was tired. He'd just done the Howard Stern show and I was attacking him. And he was very kind. He's like, oh, that's great, man. I love to hear that. And I was like, okay, do you want to hang out or anything? Are you good? Do you want to? Can I buy you coffee? Are you good? You're leaving? You don't hear me? You can't hear me? Okay, I love you. All right, bye. And Vice President Joe Biden doing a lot of what his boss Barack Obama used to do, give him responsibility. He is paying that forward and giving a lot of responsibility to Vice President Kamala Harris, who the other day he said smarter than him. He actually said that, and he tapped the vice president to handle the border crisis. She's now Vice President Kamala Harris will oversee effort to resolve problems at U.S.-Mexico border is the headline. And here is Joe Biden talking about that yesterday.
It's not her full responsibility and job, but she's leading the effort because I think the best thing to do is to put someone who, when he or she speaks, they don't have to wonder about, is that where the president is? When she speaks for me, doesn't have to check with me. She knows what she's doing, and I hope we can move this along. So, Madam Vice President, thank you.
I thought that sounded pretty good, gave her a lot of responsibility and agency, and here is Kamala Harris in her own words.
There's no question that this is a challenging situation. As the president has said, there are many factors that lead president to leave these countries. And while we are clear that people should not come to the border now, we also understand that we will enforce the law and that we also, because we can chew gum and walk at the same time, must address the root causes. that cause people to make the trek, as the president has described, to come here. And I look forward to engaging in diplomacy with government, with private sector, with civil society, and the leaders of each in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to strengthen democracy and the rule of law and ensure shared prosperity in the region. We will collaborate with Mexico and other countries throughout the Western Hemisphere. And as part of this effort, we expect that we will have collaborative relationships to accomplish the goals the president has and that we share. I also look forward to working with members of the Congress who I think share our perspective on the need to address root causes for the migration that we've been seeing. And needless to say, the work will not be easy, but it is important work. It is work that we demand and the people of our countries, I believe, need to help stem the tide that we have seen.
All right, so that's the statement from the vice president. I think she sounded like she knows what she's talking about. I mean, those are prepared talking points, but that's the effort, engaging in diplomacy and talking about root causes. It sounds like there's some smart people in this administration that are taking on this major problem, which was almost solved, not solved, but comprehensive immigration reform could have passed back in 2013. Look into it. Okay, so now not everybody's happy. Here is the governor of Arizona. I think his name is Ducey, Gary Ducey. Sounds like a used car salesman. He doesn't like Kamala Harris. Can't even pronounce her name.
Well, I have been informed that Vice President Kamala Harris has been put in charge of border security. She's about the worst possible choice that one could make. In no point in her career has she given any indication that she considers the border a problem or a serious threat.
All right, so that sounds like they're off to a great start. Republican governor, border state Arizona, Gary Ducey. I mean, he could have said, like, listen, I don't think that she's the best choice, but I have to work with the administration and, you know, that kind of a boilerplate statement. But now she's got to go in like Madam Secretary and say, I know you had to say that, but seriously, are you going to work with us? Or are you really going to be an asshole? I mean, that's how I would do it. And how about this very, very important and good story? I'll read from CNN Politics. After centuries of carrying out executions, Virginia on Wednesday became the 23rd state to abolish the death penalty after Governor Ralph Northam signed historic legislation into law that ends capital punishment in the Commonwealth. Here he is, Governor Blackface.
It is a powerful thing to stand in the room where people have been put to death. I know that experience will stay with me for the rest of my life. And it reinforced me that signing this new law is the right thing to do. It is the moral thing to do to end the death penalty in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
You know what else is going to stay with you forever? Those pictures from your college yearbook, dude. That's going to stick with you, too. But I don't want to make light of that. That's really is huge news. Virginia has become the first southern state to repeal the death penalty since the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated the punishment in 1976. New law goes into effect in July and comes as a major shift for Virginia. Virginia has put to death more people in its history than any other state. 2 inmates currently on death row in Virginia will have their death sentences commuted to life imprisonment. So I think that's big news, really important news, and it's great to. And I want to give a credit to Virginians who worked to get these political leaders elected, conservatives and liberals, a lot of conservatives against death penalty. And so congratulations, Virginia. Welcome to the 1900s. And with that, I'm going to give you everything that's left and not politics and not COVID, although I really didn't do any COVID headlines. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the news dump. And there is a bit of a drama that has occurred yesterday. My guest, Andrew Spar, who is a great friend of mine, has he said at the end of his interview, he seemed critical of some of the news dump jingles that have been written by Dan McDonald and collaborated by with listeners Pete Coe and Dan McDonald and others as well. And here is what Andrew Spar said at the end of his interview. He is a listener. He is a paid subscriber. He is a really good friend of mine. And this is what he said about the news dump jingle.
Absolutely. And Pete, you do really need you need a jingle for the news dump. I'm just going to say.
Well, you can criticize or you can submit. Can you rhyme? I look forward to the Andrew Spar news dump jingle. Thank you, buddy. I love that you're listening. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And in what is now going to be one of the great moments in the first just over a year of this podcast, there was a retaliation by listeners to those comments. Dan McDonald and Pete Coe went right into action collaborating on News Dump Jingle that targets guest and president of the Florida Education Association, Andrew Spar, specifically. Here we go.
Andrew Spar hates the song, what a Florida chump. We hope a gator eats him on today's news dump.
Wow. Holy cow. The president of the Florida Education Association has been eaten by an alligator for his comments criticizing the news dump jingle. Wow, we've got a real situation on our hands. Oh, man, I love it. This is getting real fun, folks. Thank you. All right, here are the stories that are still important and that it's all a news dump. It's everything that's left. All right, let's start with news from a very, very famous comedian, one of the most famous of all time, the former host of The Tonight Show, Jay Leno. Jay Leno, under pressure from Asian American organizations for years, he's now finally apologized for jokes that he made in the past. He said,
"Yeah, I don't consider this particular case to be another example of cancel culture. I mean, but a legitimate wrong that was done on my part."
He apologized on a Zoom call to Guy Aoki, who's the head of Media Action Network for Asian Americans, reporting from Variety. The Pope has ordered Cardinals to take a pay cut. How about that? The pandemic has hit the Vatican finances pretty hard. It looks like they're going to have to sell off some gold and children. Vatican says Cardinals are second only to the pontiff in the church hierarchy. They're going to take a 10% pay cut started in April. So I'm not sure they're going to be able to afford their lawyers anymore. Oh, and tech stocks took a beating yesterday. Stocks gave up early gains and wound up broadly lower on Wall Street, led by declines in tech heavyweights like Facebook and Apple. And guess what? GameStop, the hell's wrong with me? Just lost a third of its value. Remember when it was like $300? Anyway, GameStop had another bumpy ride, losing a third of its value after releasing a disappointing earnings report. Really? Nobody's going and getting gains at the mall anymore? What else lost its stock? Radio Shack? Is there a Radio Shack anymore? Do you have one? Are they all gone? I think they're all gone. I guess this is technically a political story. I don't usually put in the news dump, but it's also an animal story, and I didn't have one yet. I wanted a good one. I didn't want the shark attacking the 9-year-old autistic kid in Florida, which is horrific. I didn't want to say that one, but I do want to say this one that the dog is back. The German Shepherd, the president's dog, Major is its name. Apparently, it nipped a Secret Service agent earlier this month. Anyway, dogs Major and Champ have returned to the presidential residence, and that's good. You want the president to have his dogs. I think that's important. The South is bracing for a severe weather outbreak, including some areas that got hit with tornadoes last week. Major tornadoes possible down south. Stay safe down there, folks. U.S. soccer stars yesterday testified before Congress on the gender pay gap. I wanted to try to cover that earlier, but I didn't get to it. But really important, interesting story. Florida woman wearing boxing gloves attacked a student on a middle school campus. Really? In Florida? How surprising. Jacksonville woman was arrested on child abuse charge for apparently, attacking her daughter's bully. Keep it up, Florida. You guys are doing great. You're doing good. I kid our Florida listeners and subscribers. A lot of great people down there. We're going to party. We're going to party in Florida for sure, definitely. I love going to Florida. My wife definitely loves it. So, looking at you, Brian Mitchell, huh? We're coming by. We're going to crash your house. Can't wait to see it. All right, that's it for today's news dump. That's it. Let's get to my first guest. I can't believe I'm already 34 minutes in because hopefully you skipped ahead because my conversations, that's really the meat of the show. I don't know. I don't mean to be self-conscious about the news dump, but that was a long one. Put a lot into it. So I've got two great guests today. Coming up, the president of the Brady group, the Brady anti-gun violence, Brady United, Kris Brown is going to join me. We had a really interesting conversation. I think I'm going to put that video up on YouTube. It was very good. I'm very, very happy with that. We covered a lot of ground, absolutely learned quite a bit from talking to Kris Brown. She's a lovely human being. I really enjoyed that. So that's coming up. But first, Judd Legum is my first guest today. Judd Legum. He is a journalist who he started at ThinkProgress. I mentioned all of his credits earlier, but you got to subscribe to Popular.Info. I've been a subscriber for a long time. He's done some really important work, independent media, on his own. He's got one assistant. He's like me, basically, and he's just doing really great work. So I was excited to highlight his work, and I was excited to share this conversation with you. He is on Twitter at Judd Legum, Popular.Info. Subscribe now. Here we go. All right, here he is. Probably the author of one of my favorite newsletters. I guess my two favorite newsletters are by him and someone that he knows really well, Emily Atkin, Heated. They're the first two I subscribed to, and she's talked to me a lot about you, Judd. Welcome to Stand Up. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Pete.
What would you like to say about her at the start? Let's start there. Emily Atkin and Heated.
She does amazing work. You know, she was just out in Minnesota for a long time working on a pipeline that they're trying to build there and covering those stories. So I think she does a really incredible job covering climate issues. And whenever I can think of something that has to do with climate, I call her up and see if we can work together, because I know that she'll actually get the climate issues right and I won't screw up the science, and we collaborate sometimes.
That's awesome. Yeah, you do. And I love when you do. So I suppose there's some people, Judd, who are podcast listeners, but they're not newsletter subscribers. I'm sure the other way around too. Some people do both a podcast and a newsletter. But to people who listen to podcasts, how do you explain what the newsletter is, specifically yours, obviously?
Yeah, I take a little bit of a different approach to a political newsletter. There's a few prominent ones out there that try to give you a rundown of everything going on in politics and policy that day. I take a little bit of different approach where I try to zero in on usually just one thing and give you a really deep dive into it, whether that's money in politics, what the money is behind a particular bill. I've done a lot on voting, the voting suppression bills that we've seen pop up in a lot of
doing great work on that right now.
Or some other issue, but I'll take one issue, try to discover some new stuff about it, and give it to you in about 1,000 to 1,500 words, so it doesn't take up too much time.
How does it make you feel to know that a lot of people read Popular.Info on the toilet?
That would make me a little uncomfortable, but I can't say that I've never done it myself.
All right.
So I understand. We have a difficult time dealing with even a few seconds where we're not consuming content. So if I can fill that, if that's the time you've got, I'll take it.
We'll have to create a sponsor. So I think that the work that you're doing is so important, but I don't know how to ask this question. I mean, I'm not going to offend you, and you're going to give me a good answer. But I kind of feel like, how are you with one other person working with you doing such important work and uncovering such important issues and getting all this data, because it's very data driven. You're clearly doing a lot of research. Like, how come that? I'm not saying that the Washington Post or New York Times or ProPublica or CNN doesn't do good investigative work or good reporting, but it feels like you've really covered quite a few stories in a way that's better than what we see in a lot of the more mainstream corporate media, even more robust. And it's like, how come? You're just one guy. You're really talented. You work very, very hard, not taking anything away from you. But as you know, because you know probably a lot of people at all these other media outlets, they're really talented and work hard there too.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for spaces where I feel like the other folks may be missing a story. A lot of my money in politics stuff, I think, comes down to the fact that everyone in sort of the DC world, and I mean this by people who are looking at national politics, not necessarily people who are living in DC, kind of just accepts the idea that corporations give a lot of money to politicians on both sides. That's just what happens. That's the way the world works. There's lobbyists, there's money. This is the way the world functions. And I've kind of just set that aside and said, wait a second, here's what the companies are saying. They say they support voting rights. They say they support the Black Lives Matter movement, whatever it is. Let's look at that and compare that with what their political giving is. And it's not rocket science. It's often a lot of work. It can be tedious, especially when you get into the state level giving, where you've got to go through these state websites that I sometimes I suspect they might be set up to make this work a little hard. Like, do you really have to have a text file, which I'm then going to have to reconvert 6 times to get it to show up in a spreadsheet? But anyway, I'll save your listeners the details of that.
Now, that's actually interesting to me to know that that's the kind of work that you end up having to do to get the data that you have and you put in a newsletter every day. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not rocket science, but I think the first step is just setting aside that assumption that this is the way things work.
Well, it's interesting how you select the stories, the companies, the issues that you do cover, and we can talk about that. I mean, I think you kind of just answered that to some extent, but I think that the work that you did with Facebook was really, really important in terms of covering them. I also think that's like, how do you get the access and the reporting? Because I feel like a lot of what you're doing is people are sending you private information, as they do journalists. You're doing journalism, but you're getting people from the companies that you report on to give you the information that you need. But covering Facebook, how did you do that? And by the way, were you ever afraid? They're so powerful. Have you been afraid of any of the people or companies you've taken on? Have they ever threatened you or anything like that?
It comes up from time to time, not with Facebook. I did get into a little row with a pet supply distributor. I believe it was Petco, sent me a nasty letter, but I was able to resolve it with them.
Like a legal threat type of thing.
Yeah, like a cease and desist thing. I think the way I handle it to try to make myself feel better is you just have to be pretty rigorous. You check your work. I do have my research assistant, Tess. If she does something, I'm going to look at it. I send my stuff to her. We double check it. That's why I always also send an email out to the companies, whether or not I think it's likely that they're going to comment. It's just a good idea. If you happen to get something wrong, you can say, hey, I sent this over to you and gave you an opportunity. And if I did get it wrong, it wasn't intentional, which helps you from a legal case.
Based on that precept, how many more answers do you get from individuals and companies that you're requesting comment on now that you really have become a very popular force in politics and journalism? Has that changed a lot?
It has. I would definitely say that people get back to me more because, if you're working in corporate PR, the best thing that can happen is just ignore it and it'll go away. And this guy will put out his thing and no one will pay attention to it. Like that's option one.
Yeah.
But I think that as I've developed the newsletter, I'm heading into, I'm not quite through 3 years, but I'm getting there. I think 3 years in July. I've built up, a record where people say, not every time, but a lot of times people pay attention to this. So, for instance, when I just published a story at the beginning of this week about 3 companies that were trying to get around their pledges not to donate to these Republicans who had voted to overturn the election.
Yeah.
All 3 companies got back to me, within my deadline with a comment. So that probably wouldn't have happened, 2 years ago. Maybe I would have heard back from one company. Maybe I would have heard back from none. But, I'm getting more. Now, it doesn't happen all the time, but definitely more. So
you, at one point, ran for office yourself back in 2018, a Maryland delegate or something? 2010. Oh, forgive me. That was, after you worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign. That's right.
That's right.
And my question is, what did you learn running for office? You didn't win, but what did you learn running for office that now informs the work that you're doing on voting and on the funding of campaigns and so on?
So much, really. And actually, my focus on money in politics really is informed by that, because one of the things that I realized when I ran for office, and I was running for a local race, state delegate in Maryland, but you still have to raise money, and it is awful. It is so horrible to call people and ask them for money, because you have to call people or sometimes you call people you don't know, but the best thing is to call somebody and ask them for money. And it's just, I used to get a knot in my stomach.
Yeah, that's the main reason I thought about running for office a year and a half ago, the House seat that was open here, and that was the main reason why I didn't, number one. And number two, The other main reason was I wasn't qualified at all, and then I saw the people who were running, and one guy's name is Mondaire Jones, who won, and I look back and think about what the fuck was I thinking? I'm a stand-up comedian who does a podcast from my shed. Anyway, getting into what you learned. I interrupted you there because that is a really hard thing. How did that inform you, having to raise the money and what it meant?
So what it means is a lot of people say, well, corporations can only give $5,000. So what does it really matter? You know, even a run for Congress might cost you $1.5 million or more. Yeah. So what's $5,000? But what I learned when you're running is that that's how you have to raise the money, $5,000 at a time. So actually that $5,000 is really important because it's also easy money. You just call up the corporate, the person of the corporation, say, hey, could you give me money? And usually they'll just say yes, especially if you're an incumbent. So if you lose that, you then have to figure out a way to get that money back because you don't want to have less money than you did last time. So it actually is very important, even if those corporate donors are only a small percentage. Now, there's some people who corporate PAC donations are 80% of their total money raised. So for them, obviously, it's really important. But even if it's only 10% or 20%, that's a big deal. Like that really, people will really pay attention to that. So that's part of that experience of running has, informed my understanding of why this money is important.
There are two stories.
I didn't take corporate PAC money when I ran, but I understood that was also a pain because it just meant that I had to raise that much more money from individuals.
If someone could corrupt you, Judd, what would it be? A cheese company, soda? What's your weakness? Cake?
I do like cookies. I am a cookie person. So that could be a way in there for
Judd Legum is in the pocket of the Keebler elves, folks.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that the two stories you've been covering on this issue recently are about the Republicans who did not certify Biden's win, and a number of companies also that are, or another states, I should say, and legislators and legislative bodies that are rolling back voting rights. And let me see if I get this right. But what we're saying is on the latter issue here, if Delta or Coca-Cola or whatever were running ads about harmony and we love black folks now and interracial this and that, and because BLM actually is publicly really popular, this new kind of civil rights movement, so the corporations jump on board, they try to win customers, fine. I'm fine with that to some extent. That's how corporations work. That's how money is made. But then if they are donating to legislators and to people who are parts of, states that are rolling back the voter rights, nothing could be literally more racist than that. You're pointing out, how am I doing it? Pointing out the contradiction about what your reporting is trying to expose.
Yeah, I think that's right. And for companies, especially a lot of these Georgia-based companies, because it does have such a long history in the civil rights movement. Obviously, that's where John Lewis was a congressman before he passed away, who nearly died trying to secure voting rights. And companies like Coca-Cola, not only did they do the pro Black Lives Matter stuff, they had a whole series of ads in the lead up to this election, encouraging people to utilize all the different methods of voting, vote early, vote by mail. And then at the same time, they're supporting politicians who are then rolling that back, trying to make it more difficult to vote early, more difficult to vote by mail. So that's really the contradiction. And they really have the ability, these companies, because they're so important to Georgia, that if they were to speak out, and they've kind of, been waffling around on the issue, they're saying a little bit more than they have, but they're not really speaking out. But if they were to speak out strongly, that would have a big impact because, you don't mess around with Coca-Cola in the state of Georgia. They're a big deal there.
Coca-Cola, Delta, I think Southern Energy. I know these names because of your reporting, and I think a lot of activists know these names because of your reporting as well. You've exposed them. How does it work? How do these campaigns work? You put the information out there. You're not the activist. Yeah. You're the journalist. You put the information out there, and then activists and commentators take that information and we get outraged by it, and we use it and to create awareness. How I'm trying to muddle through how it works. How is it working right now? How are you seeing this campaign that I think voting rights people, pro-democracy people, our anti-racists are launching and to try to expose these companies? How do you see it playing out?
Yeah, one thing I really realized is you understand why what happened in Georgia in November and January happened, because the folks there have their stuff together. They're very organized. So, I put this out and I had talked to them because I wanted to get their comment about, I was like, hey, I'm working on this. What do you think about it? So they knew it was coming. But I put it out that morning. By the next day, they had ads in all the statewide papers. Then they started. So that was the first thing they did. Then they started doing protests in front of Coca-Cola, these other places. They had billboards. They were doing die-ins. I mean, I'm not taking any credit for that because they did all of that. But they are so organized. They know how to pull the levers, and they are, there's still a lot of problems with the bills. They kind of smashed them together. They keep introducing new ones, so it's hard to say. But
the Georgia bills to repeal, to roll back voting rights, you mean?
Yeah. So, but they have dropped some things that were really bad. They were trying to get rid of no excuse absentee voting. They've abandoned that. They were trying to get rid of voting on more than one Sunday, which is a big deal, especially in the Black community in Georgia, because that's when they're organizing early voting.
To the polls.
There's still a bunch of stuff that's not good, but I think that those groups are making progress there in Georgia.
Wasn't it Georgia? Wasn't one of the rules was you can't bring people like drinks and seats while they're waiting in line. And obviously people live in cities more densely populated, even if the polls are run efficiently, are going to be waiting in longer lines. And if they aren't on purpose going to be efficient, they're going to be waiting in longer lines, and they're older and they're blah, blah, blah. So that was actually a thing. Like, has anybody gotten to the bottom of how that was proposed? That is so brazen, Judd. Like that one is so much.
A thing. I mean, not only was that a thing, like that's still in there, that they're going to make it a crime to give someone a bottle of water or a granola bar while they're in line. And I think it's really just, you kind of think about it working backwards. Okay, well, we can't have a poll tax anymore, and we can't have this and we can't have that. So what can we do just to make it a little bit more uncomfortable to vote?
But it's
so I think that's what they came up with.
It's so blatantly racist. So much of this, it's like you can't listen to R&B or moisturize with cocoa butter or anything that Black folks generally will do. And you're taking it away from them, trying to make it more uncomfortable and marginalize them even more than they have been. It's so brazen. And by the way, I demand as a subscriber that you get to the bottom of who came up with that rule, Judd, on the lines.
I'll do my best.
You must get. What do you get from your subscribers in terms of asking you, what to do, or God forbid, telling you what to do editorially? I mean, it's an interesting thing to be independent.
Yeah, I do get a lot of emails, and some of them are great. Some of people, suggest things that end up being not only one newsletter, but a whole string of newsletters. And you referenced this earlier, and I didn't. I don't think I got a chance to address it, but what's interesting is you might start off with some public data, the campaign finance data that you're just pulling, anyone can get it. But then people are like, oh, okay, you're talking about, my company. So I'm going to now give you, here's a memo, here's an email that we got talking about this issue. So there starts being a feedback loop, and then you publish that memo, and then somebody else, then more people see it in that company and they start feeding you in. And then people say, oh, you're tracking donations to these members of Congress who voted to overturn the election. You haven't talked about my company, but I just got this email, so now I'm going to send that to you. So there's a lot of really good back and forth, and I really enjoy it because I think that it helps me do a better job. But I think it also, people themselves are feeling empowered because it gives them a vehicle, hopefully without costing themselves their job. I try to do my best with that to push things forward that they think are important.
When we're talking about campaign donations, Judd, how hard is it to get that data? Because it's hard to know what is available and how the FEC works, Federal Election Commission, and the dark money and Citizens United. I'm always surprised that you're able to get this information? Because I thought it was, it was legal to hide much of those donations. How do you get that? Or I should say, what is the current legal paradigm, and how does it make your job harder?
Some of it is hidden, and I wish they would change. That's one thing actually you could do. The Supreme Court is pretty screwed up, and they've allowed a lot of unlimited corporate donations, but there's really no law that says that this stuff has to be hidden from public view. So basically, if you set up a nonprofit, and certain kinds of nonprofits can be involved in politics, called a 501c4. You can take unlimited donations, and I'll never find out about it. I mean, unless somebody tells me, but I won't find out about it on the FEC website because you don't have to report it. So that I'm not getting. What I'm getting is I can get money from the super PACs. If it's a PAC, can take unlimited money, but you have to report it. So right. I can get that money, and I can get money from the corporate PACs, which are much more limited, $5,000 per election, so $10,000 for a cycle with a primary and a general, and I can get that. So I'm focusing on the stuff that I have. Sometimes I get some good tips about other stuff that's going on that's not public, but there is a good amount there that you can see, and you try your best to figure out what else is going on. But there is some stuff that you can't find out.
Well, listen, man, I know I got to let you go, but I really, really enjoy talking to you, and love being a subscriber to your newsletter. It was the first one I think I subscribed to. You got in there early, and it's doing really well. And I think you've done a lot of great work throughout your career at ThinkProgress and in other places, but it's got to be your best work. Congratulations. Keep it up. Long live Judd Legum and Popular.Info.
Thanks so much, Pete.
All right, bud. There he goes, Judd Legum. And check it out, Popular.Info, everybody. Please go subscribe and go on Twitter. Like, really, he's got a huge following, and if he promotes the show, it'll be really good for me and the show. So if you want to grow the show, it's a great thing to let him know that you enjoyed him here, and then he comes back and we have great conversations and we support each other, and that's definitely how it works here in podcast and Substack newsletter, Patreon, independent media. That's how independent media works. You find other people that you find credible, and you support each other, and I know Judd is definitely going to promote the show. So absolutely let him know on Twitter at Judd, JUDDLEGUM. Go tweet him right now. All right, and my next guest also joining me for the first time. He is the president of what I call an anti-gun violence nonprofit organization called Brady, BradyUnited.org. Of course, inspired by James Brady, Ronald Reagan's former press secretary. And she started a career on Capitol Hill working for Congressman Jim Moran, advocating for the bill that would eventually become the groundbreaking Brady bill, requiring background checks on federally licensed gun sales. Kris Brown also served as chief legal officer to a publicly traded company based in Switzerland, and she was a lawyer in the private sector and then went back to the nonprofit sector, and she's really cool. I enjoy talking to her. She's on Twitter at Kris, that's KRISB_Brown, at KrisB_Brown. Give her a follow, support Brady United, and here's my conversation about how to bring down gun violence in America with Kris Brown. Okay, there she is, Kris Brown, joining me for the first time. Very excited to have you on this show. You guys are doing very important work. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Pete. Appreciate the time.
So you have been at the Brady organization for a long time, and just tell me how you arrived there. I mean, your background is in law, right? You're a lawyer. You had a legal degree. You worked with a former congressman, Jim Moran. And then how did you end up with the Brady organization?
Well, Jim Moran, actually. All roads lead to Jim Moran. So you're right that I was a lawyer for many years in private practice, and then was a general counsel of a company that was based overseas in Switzerland, where I lived with my family. And the question I was always asked when people figured out I was American, and it didn't matter where people were from, it was, what's up with gun violence in America? And I realized, even though I had worked on the Brady law when I worked for Jim Moran, it was one of the issues that I covered was gun violence, and thought I knew a lot about it. I had kids, life moved on, and 16 years later, roughly, from those experiences, I'd become inured to the level of violence that we experience every day in this country. And living overseas really was a galvanizing moment in my life to understand a lot of things about our country through a different kind of lens. When I moved back, I took off a year, stayed home, and really thought about what I wanted to do next. I wanted to move into advocacy again after working for corporations for a while. And so it was either gun violence prevention or climate change. I think these are two huge and important issues facing us. Gun violence is a uniquely American problem. And so I talked to my old boss, Jim Moran, about it, and he connected me with Brady, and the rest is history. So it's just interesting that I've ended up back doing what I care so passionately about. And I think it's such an important issue because this issue for us is connected to so many other critical issues in our country. It's gun violence. It's also racial equity. It's racial justice. It's public health and how we navigate that. It's just a really, really important time for this movement.
Whenever you talk to Europeans, especially Europe, I mean, other countries as well, Australians as well, it's like you don't have universal health care. You have the death penalty and then the guns. It's those three things that are kind of uniquely American, but the gun issue comes up so often. And unfortunately, we get these high profile, violent acts of violence, mass murders. And the rest of the world looks at it and goes, what's wrong with us? So let's get into let's get into that. I just wanted to start by talking about, I always say this after every one of these high profile shootings, people react with rightful, understandable cynicism that, nothing ever changes. But if you're paying close attention, you'd know that because of organizations like yours, because of activists all over the country, a lot of very effective laws have been passed at the state level for sure. And we can talk about, the agenda and the federal level as well in the past. But can we just focus on those successes and why they matter?
Absolutely. Well, they matter because we live in 50 states, right? And if there is inaction on certain issues at the federal level, you still have state laws that can make a big difference in saving lives. I'll use California as an example. California has some of the strongest gun laws on the books across the country. And if you look at California's rate of gun violence, both death and injury, over the last 20 years compared to the averages in the United States, you will find a much slower increase in gun violence in California attributable to these laws. So often we hear, it doesn't matter, gun laws, they don't work. Well, they do work, actually. All of the research that has been done on the states that have the highest rates of gun violence are states with the weakest gun laws and the states with the highest number of guns per capita. It's not by happenstance that that's the case. And the kinds of things that we've been able to do across the country isn't just a handful of laws in a handful of states. We have comprehensive laws, funding, activities, enforcement in many states across this country. More than half of them, in fact, have expanded the Brady background check system. Almost 19 now have extreme risk laws that are in effect, that's sometimes called red flag laws. A whole lot of momentum has happened in my own state of Virginia, which is almost unthinkable a decade ago to think that Virginia would be leading the nation with the enactment of stricter gun laws. But that's exactly what happened after the people spoke, after the horrific Virginia Beach shootings. We changed who represented us. And now we have a gun violence prevention majority in the House and Senate. And we have 8 new bills that were signed in the last session and a host more that have passed. That's real progress that is happening all across this country because regular, everyday Americans have lifted up their voice and said enough and demanded that politicians run and win on strong gun violence prevention platforms.
What do you attribute to the fact it's hard to get laws passed, no matter what we're talking about? You work for a congressman, you understand that, and obviously you're running this organization, so you understand it as well as anybody does. But when you hear that there's like 80% approval on something like, in this case, background checks, it makes you wonder why certain laws don't get passed. A lot of times people attribute money, especially from groups like the NRA that congressmen get, and that's why they don't vote against these. But I actually think that's not necessarily always true, and there's a lot of nuance there. for different districts and congressmen, because I think they and their constituents are true believers in not having any laws, regulations around their guns. I don't want to get cynical with you and make jokes, make fun of them, because I know that you're above that with your organization. But the point to me seems to be, even though there's wide approval on something like background checks, it's not the case in the districts. These districts that are very gerrymandered, the people in their districts don't actually want those laws. So those 80% numbers comes from all Americans, but the way that districts and states are made up. Am I onto something here?
I think you are. Look, I think it's complicated. I do think the role of money in politics can't be understated. And we know this, right? Because part of the reason we have Donald Trump, we can thank the National Rifle Association for that. They contributed more to Donald Trump's reelection in 2016 than any other organization contributed to Donald Trump, of what we even know. It's at least 30 million. Some reporters who've done the investigation of it think that it's closer to 70 million. So we can't understate the role that the NRA has had in electing certain very extreme individuals to Congress who will broker no compromise. And you're right. It is also, though, a framing of this issue around guns in America that's actually a wholesale rewrite of the history of guns in America by the NRA that they've done since 1976. Yeah. And basically they have, right, the ads that we see for some of the guns that are sold, for example, get your man card here associated with buying a Bushmaster rifle. All of this has been incorporated in this wildly successful marketing machine that has reframed what are guns, tools, into somehow something that is associated with virility, with patriotism, and none of that was really part of our understanding of the Second Amendment or the role of guns until the NRA invented it. Too many people have bought into that myth. And the sad part is, and I am very sober on this point, the people who are dying because of this are largely the gun owners. The very people who are buying into those myths have family fire in their home, all too common. The biggest gun violence we have in this country right now, of the 41,000 people who die a year, 2/3 of those are suicide. The vast majority of those are white men between the ages of 45 and 65 who have a lot of guns.
The statistics are on suicides are white men? Vast majority of suicides are white men?
Yes.
So let's talk about that, because I'm so glad you brought that up, because when we look at this issue, I'm big on actual statistics and policies that are effective and that work that to deal with a problem. The problem, actually, you can push back on this, of course. The epidemic isn't necessarily in mass shootings, although we have far too many in our country. When we talk about gun violence, far more people are dying by suicide or by in other kinds of violence. Homicide. Yeah. Thank you.
Correct.
So what do we do about suicide? What is your organization? What is the data? What do the experts think that can be done to bring down suicide? Because the truth is, I think my understanding is if you are someone who's suicidal and you are thinking about taking your life, there are different ways to do it. But and this is, very sensitive for people. But obviously, a gun is sadly the most effective way as opposed to others.
That is correct. And it breaks my heart, honestly, the number of people that I have met who had a gun in the home, either forgot about it or just didn't really think about it. And that gun was accessed by someone at risk, was not safely stored, and that gun was used to end that person's life. I have met far, far too many families. The guilt that you have to live with for the rest of your life associated with this is terrible. And the worst part of it, it gets to a myth that you really, I think, very smartly put into your question, which is, people have a belief in our society that someone intent on completing a suicide will do so, no matter what, that the means don't matter. But they do. They matter a lot, because if you attempt suicide with a gun, 9 times out of 10, you will complete that suicide. There is never, ever, ever a second chance. That's compared to every other method of suicide where the completion rate is 3%, 3% or less. And keep this in mind. Almost everyone in this country who has survived a suicide attempt goes on to die of natural causes, never attempting suicide again.
Wow.
It's not true that people intent on completing a suicide will do so no matter what. No evidence whatsoever backs that up. In fact, all of the evidence from the mental health experts that Brady has worked very closely with, because we care so much about this issue, suicide is typically a rash act. It's something that is impulsive. And that's why having a loaded, unsecured gun in your home makes it 5 times more likely you will experience a suicide in that house. So you asked, what are we doing about it? We're speaking directly to gun owners because they're the ones who have the higher risk and people considering purchasing a gun. And our campaign, our End Family Fire campaign, and our website tells Americans how they can really minimize risk of suicide by safely storing the gun, which means unloaded, locked, ammunition separate, and locked. Those barriers to access are actually critical, even for the gun owner themselves, if they're contemplating suicide. And of course, if anyone is truly at risk in your home and having suicidal ideations, the best thing is remote storage for a period of time. So our website and that campaign gives all of the information to individuals for what they can do to minimize that risk of family fire in their home.
So well said and explained. I really appreciate that. Those statistics are really important. What about legislation policy? Is there anything I've heard about, different insurance policies that if you have a gun, there's a new push, I think now, if your gun is stolen, I think that they're promoting a law that you have to report it, which doesn't like that, even to the hardest core gun owner. I would think that would absolutely be in his interest to A, that his weapon isn't used to hurt or harm someone else, and B, that he gets his property back. But so that's one. But are there any other policies that you could enforce at a local, state, or national level that on gun owners that would somehow bring down suicide? It's a tough thing to legislate.
I think that what we at Brady are pushing is a prevent family fire bill to incentivize gun owners to get tax rebates for purchasing safe storage equipment. We prefer to take a carrot approach to incentivize people to undertake these basic measures. And the cost of safes across the country has really gone down, and many of them are incredibly easy to use and with a literally touch of a finger, biometric, just like my phone, then only I can open the safe. But if I press the button, it is instantaneously open. So a lot of these arguments that you hear from individuals, well, if I lock it, then how can I access it if something is happening? Well, if you don't lock it, then your child is going to access that gun and think that it's a toy. 8 kids a day are killed or injured with guns in their own home.
What?
In their own home. So what's the risk? The real risk is without safe storage, that gun that you're bringing into the house to protect you and your family is the thing that actually harms you or your most precious commodities, your kids.
I was on the most popular podcast in the world about a year and a half ago, Joe Rogan, who's an old friend of mine and comedian and a gun guy. And we argued about guns. I mean, it was a friendly argument, but it certainly wasn't a friendly reaction from his audience, which literally got tweets yesterday, a year and a half ago, from people who have just listened to this podcast. But there was 2 things they were focused on that I wanted to ask you about, which is, and I also wanted to work in that I was on that podcast. It's that people reacted really harshly and negatively to my point that gun violence is a public health problem. That was the most surprising. I want to address that. But before that, I said home invasion is not a common thing. But even if you wanted to argue that it was, the idea that you're going to get to your gun and kill the assailant or injure the assailant and not maybe somebody else. I mean, we've heard about these accidents where your teenage daughter crawls in the window at night. You didn't know she was out and he kills her. That happens way too often. And so the realistic scenario that you defend, quote, your castle with your gun, much less that your castle's being invaded. I get, those are the two comments that I really got the most pushback on from. You can take them whatever you order you want or however you want.
Well, you're right. So good for you, Pete. It helps to have the facts on your side. It's not always persuasive, unfortunately, for some people who really feel intrinsically this emotional attachment to this gun, right? And there's some people who carry around these guns with them at all times. They feel that kind of unsafe. The reality is, as every piece of research and data shows, a gun is very rarely effectively used to protect yourself from an intruder.
But when it is, it gets reported like crazy by the gun, right? Like when someone does successfully defend themselves using a gun, you might as well talk about nothing. Am I right about that? The way that it disproportionately gets reported?
You are right about that. And I'll tell you a story of something that just happened to me a few days ago, because it relates to a lot of stories I hear from people who approach me about having guns in the home and the use as a deterrent or as a means to protect yourself, actually shooting the person who's coming in. I was walking down the street 2 days ago, and I was turning the corner. One of my daughter's best friends lives on the corner, and there were 10 police cars surrounding the house, and the police had their guns drawn at the front door. I reacted viscerally. I started shaking. I was terrified because I've been friends with this family, for a decade, very close. As it turns out, a woman who was mentally unstable broke into the home when the cleaners were coming in and was ransacking the kids' rooms, right? She had no gun. She was mentally unstable and was on drugs. And she was arrested. She was taken away. And my friend Matt, who was home with his kids, his wife was having a medical procedure done, said, if I had a gun, it's fight or flight. She might have been shot. And that's what happens so often. It is fight or flight. I know so many people who tell me, oh my gosh, someone entered my home. I wasn't sure who they were. And I brandished my gun. If I'd shot that person, I probably would have killed them. And it was just mistaken. The person came into the wrong house. This is I hear this all the time. So I think that's what we truly have to internalize. And I find often that most gun owners will admit that. It's just a contingent who refuse to admit that there is any downside risk whatsoever with having a loaded gun on your person at all times. And that's just factually, not true. And we all know from our own human experience that it's not true. So it's frustrating when you meet people who don't want to acknowledge that there is some risk. As I acknowledge, I understand it may make you feel better to have this gun. And in some circumstances, maybe that is the right choice. I don't judge it, but be open to the facts and circumstances for the real risks that having that gun also places for you and your family.
What about the simple issue of calling gun violence a public health issue?
That also puzzles me, right? I think that some people don't seem to like that because they're afraid it means a lot more regulation. They just think, well, that's acknowledging that gun violence kills a lot of people and that we should approach it like other public health problems. What's like that? Tobacco. Well, what happened to tobacco? We regulated them. And so they view it as this whole slippery slope. They don't want to even acknowledge that 40,000 people die or that 80,000 people are injured every single year and live with those injuries, or think of it as a public health issue, because then if you acknowledge that, you also have to acknowledge the very next thing, which is, okay, what are the policies that we should put in place to address those issues.
Yeah, one of the most insane outcomes of that is when a pediatrician asks a parent if they have a gun in the home, the same reason they ask 10 other questions. Do you have a pool? Is there a fence around it? Do you have poison, anywhere? Where do you keep it? Because what they're doing there is they're trying to make sure that they educate the parent, I think, to certain safeguards. You're a new parent. Okay, I'm a pediatrician. It's my job to protect, tell you certain things you might not know. But the gun lobby has outlawed that question. You're not allowed to ask that question in some states, is my understanding. That's, to me, the best way to illustrate how folks don't want this to be a public health issue. Whether it's a pool, drugs, or, cleaning supplies, you can ask about it. But a gun that's sure to kill someone, can't ask about that. Is that right?
Well, that's another, and it's partly right. And you've given me the opportunity to tout some of Brady's incredible lawyers, not me, but the people who run our legal department at Brady, because we represented those doctors in Florida, the NRA, which uses Florida, the gunshine state, as its incubator for every failed, horrible policy that they want to foist upon the rest of the nation. What you're talking about is the gag rule that they put into effect, that the Florida legislature happily passed and signed into law, that said, physicians, you can ask about every other risk. You can ask about allergies, pools, all the things you said, Pete, but just don't ask people about one of the deadliest things in your home potentially and how you store it. You can't ask about guns. So we represented a class of doctors, argued it all the way to the 10th Circuit. And just like what happened in this last election, quite frankly, Pete, from my perspective, is the court saved us. So the court stepped in and said, you heard of this thing called the Second Amendment, I suppose, but did you ever hear of the First? Because you're violating that. And we got it overturned. And there is no other state. And the NRA, of course, is morally bankrupt, but now it's really bankrupt, right? So they haven't really focused on those efforts again since we smacked them around in court and got the ruling that we did.
Well, congratulations on that, and a good reason for people to donate to Brady or become members of your organization, because you guys are doing great work. I know I'm almost out of time here, so I just want to ask you about what we talked about the state laws, and so let's not get cynical, folks. A lot of good change has happened and is continuing to happen, but everybody now knows the word filibuster and what that means. And more folks have learned about how Congress is broken in the past few years, probably than ever before. But there's a lot of great laws that have been passed that would decrease gun violence out of the House of Representatives, a couple of which I think are sitting in the Senate right now. So what do you and your organization think the possibility of those laws ever being passed is such a tough issue, period? And the U.S. Senate is a pretty tough place.
It is. It's a little less tough with Senator Schumer at the helm than it was with Mitch McConnell at the helm. These are the two same bills that we passed in the last Congress that sat on Mitch McConnell's desk. H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446 are two bills that close the gaps in the background check system that would ensure that every gun is subject to a background check. So it's very, very basic. 97% of Americans polled say, yes, that's what we want. Now go do it. And so there is no household in America where you can get less than near 100% agreement that this should happen. If that only chamber that can't get agreement on this is the United States Senate, then what that means is we have to end the filibuster. And you forecast where I was going with this in my answer. We have waited long enough. And Raphael Warnock got down on the Senate floor. And after the HR 1 to open up voting access to really repel what's going on across the states, he said, this filibuster this rule about voting in the U.S. Senate can't be used to stop people's access to the ballot box. And then after what happened in Atlanta, I was thinking what he would say, which is rightly so, is neither should the filibuster stand in the way of, sorry, my phone is ringing here. Neither should the filibuster be something that kills us, be used as a cudgel to stop the Senate from approving something that the vast majority of Americans agree on.
Kris, final comment or words, donate to your organization. Obviously, all the Links are in the show notes for today, but what do you want to tell? What is the kind of the message that you think most resonates for people who really desperately want to see some change?
Well, I worked in Congress and I think it's easy to get upset. But look, we have 2 bills that got out of the House of Representatives. That's because people cared enough to vote in record number in 2018 and deliver us the first time in a generation a gun violence prevention majority in the House. If you think the Brady background check system needs to be strengthened and you're tired of the loopholes in the system, call your senator. Tell your senator you want votes on those bills. You'll accept nothing else, and you will be watching in this election. There's a ton of information on our website, bradyunited.org. And of course, we are a movement of people, of activists. We need every single person lifting up their voice, joining Brady. Please join us. This is a preventable tragedy in this country. Let's fix it. Let's fix it together.
Awesome. Thank you so much for talking to me. Really great talking to you and getting to know you, and keep up the great work, Kris. All right.
Thank you so much, Tate. Take care.
All right, Kris Brown of Brady United. Give her a follow on Twitter. Support them. All the links to their organization are in the show notes. I should mention that interview took place yesterday afternoon before the judgment came down from the Ninth Circuit, which we'll take a look at on tonight's Zoom Hangout. So I hope that you will be able to join us tonight, but you got to be a subscriber. So sign up now, patreon.com/PeteDominic. This show is free. It's here 5 days a week, but it's not cheap. I put a lot into it. It's 12:30 in the a.m. Got another hour of posting it all up, and I'm happy to do it. I love to do it, but if you could spare $5 or more as a subscriber, I'd love to have your support here on this independent media outlet where every day I have usually 2 experts in a very healthy dump of news and analysis for you. Thank you very much. Follow on youtube.com/standupwithpete, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, I'm on it. Linktree. I don't have Linktree. I need a Linktree. Someone help me. I got to get a Linktree. Where do you buy the Linktree? Are they at the craft store? All right, take it away, John Carroll. Talk to you tonight, folks, at the Hangout.
They knew that change was going to come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
Hello, show enders. You get the special preview, special secret, because you stayed all the way to the end, like there's some kind of weird incentive that it looks like Latasha Brown will be our special guest tonight at our Hangout, along with Eric Siegel. So that's all I've got for the show under. Sorry if it's any kind of letdown. I don't know what you're hoping for, but I'm excited about this news. Tell your friends. Good night. Goodbye. I love you.